Welcome to the Putnam County Library's Lunch and Learn with Alex Van Dusen here from Child Advocacy Centers. And he is going to talk about what Child Advocacy Centers are and why they are necessary. Thanks so much.
All right, so the camera's already on me, we're good?
You're good.
All right, so again, my name's Alex Van Dusen, and I am the prevention specialist at our center. Our center is called the Upper Cumberland Child Advocacy Centers. I'm going to talk about what child advocacy centers are today, talk about why they're necessary, and also sort of talk briefly about the issue and sort of going along with why we're necessary, and then prevention as well, because that's my position. So I always want to talk about prevention as long as I can. All right, so I'm going to start with a video. This is a little clip from the movie My Cousin Vinny. It's one of my favorite movies, and I found a reason why I could put in a clip from the movie and for it to be relevant to my job in our center. So I'm going to go ahead and play that. Maybe.
Instant grits?
No self-respecting Southerner uses instant grits. I take pride in my grits.
So, Mr. Tipton, how could it take you 5 minutes to cook your grits when it takes the entire grit-eating world 20 minutes?
I don't know. I'm a fast cook, I guess.
I'm sorry, I was all the way over here. I couldn't hear you. Did you say you're a best cook? That's it? Are we to believe that boiling water soaks into a grit faster in your kitchen than on any place on the face of the earth?
I don't know.
Well, perhaps the laws of physics cease to exist on your stove. Were these magic grits? I mean, did you buy them from the same guy who sold Jack his beanstalk beans?
Objection, Your Honor. Objection sustained.
Are you sure about that 5 minutes?
Ignore the question.
Are you sure about that 5
You
minutes?
really don't know. I think you made your point.
Are you sure about that 5 minutes?
I may have been mistaken.
I got no more use for this guy.
All right, so the reason why I play that clip is because it really paints a picture as to why child advocacy centers began. And they started in Alabama in the 1980s. But I want you to imagine, so in this movie, this attorney, he's the defense attorney, his name's Vinny, the one right here. He is questioning a witness of a crime, and he is not going very easy on this guy, right? Because he's the defense attorney, he's trying to protect his client and make sure that these testimonies are accurate. But I want you to think about, instead of the man who's being asked about the grits, I want you to imagine if it was a kid testifying, giving their testimony about abuse that they experienced. And so the problem that was observed in Alabama, it wasn't just in Alabama, I'm sure, but that's where child advocacy centers began. The problem was that when testifying, kids had the possibility of making conflicting statements or answering one question one way from some person, and then answering maybe a similar question a different way from another person. And so prior to CACs, so CAC is short for Child Advocacy Center, it's just easier to say. But so prior to CACs, a child would be interviewed before even getting to the court case, right? They would be interviewed by one person, whether it be their teacher, a principal, school counselor. Then they would be interviewed by a police officer or DCS or both, maybe a doctor. They would be interviewed multiple times by different people. And there was an issue with that because a kid, like I kind of mentioned earlier, would make one statement to one person, make another statement to someone else. And an effective defense attorney would use those conflicting statements against that child's entire testimony. Poke holes throughout their entire testimony, throw it out. Okay, so a district attorney in Alabama saw that was not okay. They had cases that they thought were in the bag, that they were solid, and effective defense attorneys poked holes in the case, got them thrown out. So that's why child advocacy centers began, to limit interviews of potential victims of child abuse, and to limit the interview to just one. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward here. Okay, so what's a child advocacy center? So the purpose, the foundational purpose of these centers was the security and integrity of the investigations involving severe child abuse. So we provide forensic interviews. So that is the one interview that's sort of the goal, is that a child who may or may not have experienced child abuse has one interview that is observable by law enforcement and DCS, whoever's involved in the case. We also provide family advocacy for the families or parents, non-offending parents or non-offending caregivers. And one of the most important parts of the Child Advocacy Center is this highlighted term here, multidisciplinary team. In Tennessee, we call it the Child Protective Investigative Team. And I'll talk about that, I think, in the next slide or two. We also provide therapy, medical exams. I do the prevention services, which I love doing. And we have one CAC for every judicial district in Tennessee. And we have 32 judicial districts, so there should be 32 CACs altogether in the state. All right, now our center, the Upper Cumberland Child Advocacy Center, we are a nonprofit organization, and we serve Tennessee's 13th judicial district, which includes Putnam County, Cumberland County, White County, Clay, DeKalb, Overton, and Pickett. So we have 7 counties that we serve. We actually have served the largest judicial district in Tennessee. So we have geographically the largest. And any severe child abuse case that falls in those boundaries in any of those counties, and if a forensic interview is recommended by either the case manager who works for DCS, Department of Children's Services, or by law enforcement, they will come to us where the forensic interview will take place, and we'll talk about sort of what that looks like, I think, in the next slide or two. Yeah, next slide. So the purpose of FIs, so we call them FIs for short, forensic interviews. The purpose is to limit the interviews for these victims of child abuse, right? We provide the space for children to talk to a trained interviewer. So the FI includes an interviewer who is trained specifically in forensic interviewing. So that's a process where a person needs to be trained to do it. It's very structured. The interviewer has to come from a presence of being impartial. So what that means is they don't show sympathy to the kid as the kid is sharing their story potentially. They have to be very sort of blank-faced, impartial, because if they're not, again, an effective defense attorney could say they're leading the child, right? They're leading the child to say what they think they want to hear, or what, you know. So yeah, very structured. Prevents the opportunity for conflicting statements from a child. And while the FIs take place, DCS, which is also sometimes goes by Child Protective Services as well, DCS, same thing, and law enforcement can view the interview from a separate room while the interview takes place. So they can listen and watch the interview, watch the child as they share their story. And sometimes they might share a story and not disclose that they've been abused, right? So we kind of come from the perspective of, let's figure out what the truth is. So sometimes that could be a child has been abused and they tell their story of being abused to their forensic interviewer. Sometimes they haven't. Sometimes for whatever reason, a report was made for this child being abused allegedly by someone, and through the investigation and interview process, we find out that that wasn't happening, right? And these interviews are video recorded and admissible in court for a child's testimony. So if a child, say during the interview, tells their story and they disclose that they've been abused by someone, whoever it might be, that video recording can be used in court and come to the court case. A child may go up, they would be asked, is this person in the video you? And they just have to say, yep, that was me. And that's all that they have to say. Without the FI, they would have to testify in front of a live court audience. And as a little kid, if you think like a little 8, 9, 10, even 12, even a teenager testifying about a story of abuse, and let's say if it's sexual abuse, and we're gonna get into some of the types of abuse that we see, imagine how frightening that would be for a child, right? So with the FI being able to be used in court, instead of the child testifying all over again in front of a bunch of people, so that's one of the very important parts of an FI, that it can be used in court. All right, I'm gonna talk about this really quickly because I don't want to take up too much time. I'm trying to be careful of the time here. So SIPIT, so in Tennessee, we have what's called SIPIT, the Child Protective Investigative Team. In other states, they might call it the Multidisciplinary Team, but in Tennessee state law, we use SIPIT. And so SIPIT is a Tennessee law mandated framework for child abuse cases. So this framework instills collaboration between different agencies. So that includes us, the Child Advocacy Center. It includes law enforcement. It includes DCS, District Attorney's Office. If there's a therapist who's involved in the case, they might be present, or someone, maybe a nurse practitioner or doctor who's involved in the case might be present as well. And so all of those people who are involved in a particular case, child abuse case, they discuss every case that they're working on. And they discuss it as a team. And a good, effective team doesn't look like everyone just agrees with everyone, right? A good, effective team involves some discussion, some disagreement, some sharing of different perspectives, different pieces of evidence, and figuring out what is the truth and what is not the truth. Whereas, as I mentioned earlier, before we started recording, other states, like I'm originally from California, California does not have this framework instilled into the state law for child abuse cases, at least not that I know of. I'm pretty sure it's not the case because there aren't child advocacy centers statewide in California. And so there isn't that piece of collaboration in these types of cases out in other places such as California. All right, we have one child protective investigative team per county. They would share, deliberate information, and determine whether or not there's sufficient evidence to either substantiate or unsubstantiate, and then if it's substantiated, to possibly prosecute. All right, so what is child abuse? So Tennessee state law, or TCA, defines child abuse as a person under 18 years old suffering from or in immediate danger of suffering from the actions or inactions of a caregiver. And then what is severe abuse? So this is somewhat of a subjective classification. Depending on who you ask, one case might be severe to some person, it might be not severe to someone else. So it's kind of subjective, but in general, severe abuse is abuse that causes or has the potential to cause serious physical or psychological harm to a child. Types of abuse. So we have a list here. I'm not gonna go through the amount of time I have on just this slide, but here you can see the different types of abuse. We have a handful of different types. We do see each of these in our district. And let's see, what's the next slide? Okay, next slide. We have some numbers from the last 4 or 5 years of severe child abuse cases in our judicial district. So the past 4 years, we've had a little over 1,000 each year. 1,000 for those within those 7 different counties. This year so far in 2024, we're at just under 500. And just because, let me say this really quick, just because it's a severe abuse case doesn't necessarily mean that it actually happened, right? That means that they're being investigated at the moment, or have been investigated. And some of them might have been true or substantiated, and some of them might not have been substantiated, and for whatever the reason might have been. Some local data, but before I go to that, I wanted to ask y'all, of the different types of abuse, of child abuse, which of those do you think we have the highest numbers of in our area, if you were to guess? Yeah, sexual abuse, yeah. So for the severe child abuse cases, the most that we see, and we see these types of cases all the time at our center, and I'll kind of talk about why that is in a second. But yeah, the most that we see is child sexual abuse or exploitation. The second highest amount is that drug exposure, right? Oftentimes that's the one that people guess for severe cases, and it's a close second. We don't, at our center, see very many drug exposed children cases in person. We don't really usually see those kids because that evidence is pretty black and white, cut and dry, that they just have to drug test ultimately, and if it's positive, then there's drugs in that person's system, right? So it's a little easier to get the evidence for that. We do see some physical abuse cases. So here we had about 65 severe physical abuse cases in our area. And let me just say, so the physical abuse cases, for them to be severe, it's usually pretty bad. And we do see those cases, unfortunately. So, and I'll just say this too, like a spanking on the butt, like that sort of physical punishment, that is not considered physical abuse in the state of Tennessee. All right, so we had about 550 sexual abuse cases, and that could include, I didn't have it on this PowerPoint, but this does include what we call commercial sexual exploitation of a minor, in common language, sex trafficking, right, child trafficking. We do see some of those cases. Those are included in that number, 550 from last year. Lack of supervision, neglect, psychological harm, and abuse deaths. Some other data local to our center. We've had 145 forensic interviews since January, as of today. We provide mental health or basic needs services to the families that we serve and the children that we serve, or get them connected to get those needs met from other organizations in our community. And so far I'm excited about this. This is data from my job. Over 5,000 kids instructed on body safety during this last school year, which I'm pretty excited about that. And hoping to expand on that next school year as well. All right, so I think, how are we on time? Good till, okay? Yep. We're done at 1 o'clock, is that right? Okay, so I really like this video. I'm gonna go ahead and play it. This video is of a woman named Erin Marin. She's the founder of Erin's Law, which is a law here in the state of Tennessee. And I really like this quote that she says in the video. "I stayed silent because my only education came from these perpetrators." So Erin was a victim of child sexual abuse. And she shares a little bit of her story in this video. And then she talks about what her law is about, Erin's law. And it's about instilling body safety and these types of lessons in public schools. I'm gonna go ahead and play this, and then we'll talk about some of the prevention stuff, I believe, after this.
I came from a family of 3 girls, and I felt like I had the perfect life. I was the happiest little 5 and 6-year-old, and had so much fun as a child. I struggled for years in my childhood with watching my family suffer. It tore our family apart. I went down the path of self-injury, suicide attempt, very depressed. This could be happening to your child. This can be happening to your next door neighbor, your best friend you've known your entire childhood, and you had no idea because of the shame that people carry. When I was a kindergartner, I had been asked by my best friend Ashley to spend the night. And I was excited, that little kid going off to my first sleepover. And after watching a Little Mermaid, we went into her room to go to sleep. She climbed up in her bed, and me on the ground in my little sleeping bag, fell asleep, and eventually I woke up to the bedroom door opening and looked over there, and there her uncle was. I thought he was checking to make sure we were asleep. And instead he closed the door, came down to where I was on the ground, told me to be quiet, and I did. I stayed quiet. He sexually abused me and told me, "This is our little secret. No one will believe you. I know where you live, Erin. I'll come get you." I pinky promised my best friend I would never tell anybody what our uncle was doing.
What is your name? Erin. And how old are you? 8.
My abuse ended when I was 8.5 and we moved. Suddenly I'm going to a new school, making new friends. Little did I realize by moving was getting me that much closer to the next perpetrator in my life. This time, it was my cousin Brian. Wake up to him sexually abusing me, and for the next almost 2 years, he repeatedly tells me, "This is our secret, no one will believe you, you have no proof that I did this." And I believed it. I believed him that no one would believe me. So I stayed silent because my only education came from these perpetrators. At 13 years old, my 11-year-old sister came to me with the same secret. My little sister blurted out the words, "Brian's gross," and I knew instantly what that meant and was just filled with anger and rage. So we broke our silence, our abuse ended, reclaimed our voice, and that was the first step in moving forward and healing our lives. Because I had my parents' support and believing my sister and I wanted other people to realize that there is support for them out there as well. Looking back on my childhood, I learned tornado drills, bus drills, fire drills. Yet there was nothing on how to speak up and tell if you're being abused. So I created Erin's Law in my home state of Illinois. Back in 2010, I was working my full-time master's level job as a counselor working with youth. I quit my job, tried to figure out a way of how I was going to explain to people that, I'm going to speak about educating kids on the prevention of abuse, because my own state lawmaker said, "Erin, we don't talk about that in society. They will never teach this in school." And I made it my mission not just to get this passed in Illinois, but I made it a mission to travel to all 50 states, testifying to lawmakers on the importance on this. And I tell these lawmakers I'm not going away. This is something that everyone should stand behind. Erin's Law requires every year child sexual abuse to be taught in public schools. So once a year, students must be informed on personal body safety, on how to speak up and tell the differences between safe and unsafe touch, safe and unsafe secrets, and give kids these voice and educate our educators on warning signs to look for. How to properly handle when a child discloses abuse. And there are multiple stories as a result of Erin's Law being passed. We need to end the stigma and shame around this subject. Legislators, parents, Teachers, they need to wake up and realize that this is going on. You all know somebody that this has happened to. I really want parents to see the importance behind this, and I want kids to reclaim their voice and be able to break their silence and end their suffering. That is my mission in life.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop it there. It's a little longer of a video than what I would like to use in general, but I think it is a really good video. I'm a big advocate for Erin Marin and her sharing her story and getting this stuff passed state by state. And I think she does a good job of explaining sort of the issue. All right. Oh. All right. So I do want to talk a little bit about prevention. I have a couple slides for parents and guardians, but I'm going to skip ahead to this slide. And if I think that there's something important from the last two, I'll go back to those. But prevention for professionals, right? So first of all, to prevent, this is just my opinion, but to prevent abuse, we need to talk about it, right? Especially if we're talking about sexual abuse, right? And we talk about other forms of abuse a little more freely. It's not as uncomfortable to talk about those other forms of abuse. But with sexual abuse, we see, I know when I was growing up, this was never talked about at schools. I think that's true for a lot of people. And as Erin said from that video, because it wasn't talked about at her school, and a lot of victims of sexual abuse from the past, you know, we all kind of say the same thing. If we were taught this in school when we were younger, we would have been able to stop it sooner, right? So that's one of our big beliefs when it comes to prevention, is to prevent it, we have to talk about it. My advice for professionals with prevention, top bit of advice, is to strive to be fully present with the kids who you serve, right? Oftentimes you'll hear about in talks of mandated reporting and things like that, the different signs to look for, right, for child abuse. My belief is that the relationship is key. Relationship is gonna give you more insight than just a sign, any one independent sign of child abuse. When you have relationships with the kids who you serve and you're fully present, as a former teacher, if I had a student walk into my classroom and they weren't as rambunctious as they normally were, right? Or they're extra quiet, you know, you notice those things as a professional, as a parent too. So that kind of goes to both. That bit of advice is for both parents and professionals, to be fully present, and to listen to the kids who you serve. You can learn indicators or warnings. Oh, sorry, I thought this point was going to go a different direction. Learn indicators or warning signs of grooming or manipulating, commonly seen used by adult perpetrators. That's an important one. There are stories of, give an example, teachers, right, abusing kids, and other teachers who worked at the same school. There were likely signs that this particular teacher was having inappropriate relationships with students, right? And in hindsight, teachers can be like, oh, well, I had a feeling, right? That teacher seemed off. This student of mine was always going to this teacher's class during school. Like, there's usually warning signs. In some cases, there are some loud warning signs. But it is important to learn indicators, to trust your gut if you think something is wrong, and to voice your concern. Don't assume, right? Just because, let's say, I'm going to speak from this mindset of a teacher. Let's say one of my students had really bad hygiene and smelled really bad. Maybe his clothes were kind of old. Some people might say that's a sign of neglect, right? And, oh, I should report. And sure, it wouldn't hurt to report a situation if you really feel strongly, have that feeling in your gut to do that. There wouldn't be something wrong with that, right? Because then DCS or law enforcement would investigate, and if there was a severe issue, then they would solve it, hopefully. But I guess by don't assume is just, again, why I stress the relationship is a key part, right? If I would ask that student, hey, like, what's going on? And probably talk to them in a private setting. Say, I can smell your body odor. Do you have deodorant? Or, think something like that. Kind of get to the crux of it. Do something if you see boundaries being crossed. Advocate for code of conduct policies and lead by example. So there's a program called Stewards of Children by Darkness to Light. Some people are familiar with Darkness to Light. And they have a training called Stewards of Children. And it talks about code of conduct policies for organizations that work with kids. And the policies are pretty straightforward and simple. Like, don't be giving gifts to your favorite students, right? Because that's kind of inappropriate. And things like that. So advocate for code of conduct policies, because not all organizations, not all education organizations have code of conduct policies as you would expect them to. So definitely, and this is good for parents too, good piece of advice for parents. Advocate for code of conduct policies. Make sure that, say, the schools that your kids go to have code of conduct policies, and if they don't, then yeah, advocate for them. Know what to do if you suspect child abuse or if a child discloses abuse to you. And don't ever hesitate to use the center that I work for, the Upper Cumberland Child Advocacy Center, as a resource for help or guidance if you ever feel like you need it. Recognizing child abuse, I kind of talked about this. Relationship is key. And then below that are some indicators as well. And I think these are kind of these are really good sort of red flags. If you see this, then you might be, you might need to call or go online and report. But peculiar reasons given by a child describing an injury or a bruise. Some indicators of neglect, avoidant behaviors to a particular person or place. And I'm going to mention this last one. Any bruising observed on non-ambulatory infants. That means infants who definitely cannot walk, right? Their main source of movement is maybe crawling. So any injuries or bruising for non-ambulatory infant, that sometimes is indicative of physical abuse. All right, if a child discloses to you, my first bit of advice is to breathe and to do your best to calm your mind. Have either of you here ever had a kid disclose abuse to you? Or have you ever, okay. And it can happen. As a teacher, when I was a teacher, I don't think I ever had a kid disclose it. That's not true. I had one kid disclose abuse to me. And she told me, oh, it's like already been investigated though, so you don't have to do anything. But I don't know if what she's saying is true. You gotta report anyway. But yeah, so and it can be it could be scary, right? If a child, imagine a little kid comes to you and tells you, so-and-so, an adult in my family, has been doing inappropriate things to me, right? And in a moment like that, you're like, whoa, like, oh, all right, okay, here we go. Let's sit down, let's have a talk, and make sure you're calm. Because if a kid discloses abuse to you, they're gonna be very sensitive to your reaction. Sometimes kids will test the waters with an adult, or maybe even with a friend, and kind of give a little statement of truth that is safer, I guess, for them than the whole truth. And yeah, kids can be very sensitive and alert to our reactions or responses. So very important to be calm. And one thing I think about too is if a kid were to disclose abuse to you, then that shows that they are trusting you and that they believe that you're going to help them and you're going to listen and do the right thing. So if a kid ever discloses abuse to you, count that as, you're doing something right. So take calmness in that fact. Find a safe location to let the child share with you. That could literally just be like, let's have a seat right here and go ahead and share with me what you want to share. Avoid asking leading questions. This is a problem that we see happen in some cases where, say, an adult, say a kid disclosed to an adult of abuse, say that adult then started asking questions like, what was it, this person? Like asking leading questions to, which could potentially mess up the case, bottom line. Document what the child shares with you. Thank the child for trusting you. Some key information to obtain: the child's name, age, home address, school, phone number to contact the parents if necessary, the alleged perpetrator's name and that person's relationship to the child, and then you're gonna want the reason for your report. And here at the bottom, we got the phone number, or you can do it online. If it is an extreme emergency where you're concerned for the child's safety, definitely call. You could always also follow it up with a call to 911 in a case like that too. All right, and I have just one last video. This kind of just talks about how to respond to a child who discloses. And then I think we're about done after. We have one more slide after this.
Never easy when a young person discloses abuse. There are probably 1,000 things going through your head, from trying to remember your organisation's safeguarding procedure, to asking the right questions. Should you be asking questions at all? But no matter how anxious you're feeling, it's worth remembering that most young people only choose to talk to someone they really trust. So chances are you're already doing something right. Whatever the situation, here are a few simple things you can do to create a safe space for a better conversation. Help them open up. For some children, talking about abuse can be scary. You need to show them that you care and that you are listening to what they say. This can be as simple as changing your body language, and avoid anything that can make you seem distracted or distant. Keep your focus on them. They're the most important thing right now. Slow down and take your time. This chat might only be a small part of the disclosure. They could just be testing the water, so let them go at their own pace. Even if the gaps in the conversation feel awkward to you, it's their story. Give them time to tell it. Reflect back and show you understand by simply going through what they've told you already. If possible, use their language. The specific words they use are an important part of their narrative. And although it's easy to jump to conclusions, or even solutions, right now they just need to feel listened to. You can practice these techniques whenever someone's telling you a story, helping them to open up, slowing things down, and reflecting back in everyday conversations won't just make you a better listener, but will also prepare you for when a disclosure does happen. It could change a young person's life.
All right.
It's never easy.
Sorry. All right. So last slide, I believe. What happens next? Let's say you make a report, whether it's online or over the phone. So after a report is made, it goes to what are called screeners who work for DCS, the Department of Children's Services, and they read the report, analyze it, and determine whether it fits in the criteria of child abuse or not. If it does, then it's screened in. If not, it's screened out. And so there's a lot of reports that are made. And so they have screeners for different areas, and they're responsible for screening in or screening out a report. If it's screened in, there will be an investigation by DCS and or law enforcement. If it's screened in as severe, there's that CIPIT, the child investigate. I'm blanking on what CIPIT, what the acronym stands for. We just call it CIPIT all the time. Child Protective Investigative Team. Sorry. If it's screened in as severe, there will be a Child Protective Investigative Team. So it wouldn't just be DCS or law enforcement. At that point, it would be all of the people involved in the team. And then if a forensic interview is recommended, the child will be brought to a child advocacy center. So in our judicial district, it would likely be brought to our center for an interview. During the interview, a child may or may not share if they've been abused. If they don't share, if they don't disclose, it doesn't necessarily mean that they haven't been. It just means that they, for whatever reason, didn't disclose. Sometimes we get situations where the kid might lie and say that they haven't been abused for some reason, and when in reality maybe they were being abused. That's a whole nother topic, why kids either keep it a secret or sometimes why they even lie about not being abused when they are. So during CIPIT, cases will be presented, and the case will either be, in general, substantiated or unsubstantiated. So AUPU is basically unsubstantiated, meaning that they didn't have enough evidence to go forward. They might still provide services and things like that for a family. But then the other direction is to substantiate, meaning that there was enough evidence to go forward. And at that point, if it's substantiated, it might lead to a civil court case for a family. And sometimes when they're substantiated, it might even go forward to criminal prosecution. And that is all I have for today. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, or do my best to answer them. Either of you have any? No? All right. Well, thank you both. And then I have, if you want to, you don't have